Join Boise State Public Radio for a concert with blues rock guitarist and vocalist Coco Montoya at the Treefort Music Hall in Boise, February 13th, with reserved seating. A night with Coco Montoya and his band. Find details and a link for tickets at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Numerous U.S. government health websites and resources have been taken down or modified as agencies comply with executive orders from President Trump. For example, public health information was taken down from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's website about contraception guidance, a fact sheet about HIV, as well as a set of government surveys showing transgender students suffer higher rates of depression and drug use and bullying, as well as other problems. Now, after this information was scrubbed, the Infectious Disease Society of America, which is a medical organization, issued a statement condemning the removal of information about HIV and transgender people. And then during all of this, Elon Musk is trying to close down U.S. aid. So what does all of this mean, and why should we care about this? Well, joining us today to discuss more is Dr. David Pate. He is the former CEO of St. Luke's Health System and the co-author of the book, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak. Hi, Dr. Pate.
Hi, Gemma.
And folks, remember, if you have a public health question, send us an email at idahomatters@boisestate.edu. Okay, Dr. Pate, there's a lot that's happened since the last time you and I talked last week. So I'm
exhausted.
I am, honestly, I don't know how much more my brain can really hold on to. So let's start with U.S. health agencies taking down critical health information, like I noted, in regards to things like contraception guidance, information about HIV.
Well, so first of all, it's not unusual for a transition in administrations to do a very temporary pause on some of the information on their websites going out and so forth. And we're typically talking about less than a day. This pause is continuing. And so this is unprecedented. And second, I do understand what some of the concerns are, but the problem with all of these, and I suspect some other topics that we're going to talk about, is that the reaction is always overreach. And so, in other words, the actions necessary to address what they're concerned about don't require going to the extreme that they do. So, for example, last week we talked about the fact that there is a very important publication of the CDC for doctors, scientists, and public health professionals called the MMWR report. And that is just giving us data and information from studies, information about outbreaks. I can't imagine that the MMWR is going to turn somebody gay or cause them to pursue transgender treatment or any of the other things that are a current outrage. But it's just information that professionals need. And without that, we are partially flying blind. And so it's a big overreach. And I am hopeful that we can get back to, let's put out true information, the best that we know. Let's put out science. Whether people want to accept it or take it or not, that's fine. But let's put this information out so that those that are looking for good guidance, good information can get it.
So with that said, Dr. Pate, this is what I've been wondering. I understand that the executive order came on the president's first day in office, where he had an order that said there are only two sexes, male and female. So therefore, he then ordered that they had to take down these health sites had to take down things in regards to transgender, in regards to people putting their pronouns on their email signatures, et cetera, et cetera. It almost seems like there is now a confusion, right? Like, as you said, overreach well, we just have to take all of this information down because HIV can affect the transgender community. It can affect, anyone. So we're better off to just take the information down than potentially not be complying with this executive order. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I do think that these orders, and not just this one, have created tremendous confusion in the various agencies. And I think there has been concern about, given the lack of clarity, what is permissible and what is not. And I am suspecting that there are some that are deciding better safe than sorry, and so let's just do this. I do think there are some acting with very good intentions, and I think there are some acting with very bad intentions.
Mm.
And I think that the result is a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos, a lot of good people leaving these organizations, and I'm not sure that's not part of the intent in all this. I don't know, but it's not a good way to lead and create positive change in a sustainable manner. And there are certainly far less drastic measures that can be taken to still achieve the administration's goals that are the public goals, publicly announced goals.
So I want to turn now to the U.S. Agency for International Development. This is better known as USAID. Elon Musk is trying to shut this organization down. In fact, he called it, quote, evil. So, Dr. Pate, as you know, this organization, which is less than 1% of the federal budget, spends billions of dollars overseas in humanitarian aid. They have been in existence for 60 years. Advocates say that this money is a critical lifeline to more than 100 countries. So let's begin, Dr. Pate, with exactly if you could tell us what USAID does.
So USAID was created by Congress, I believe, something like 1961. And it was created at a time when the new administration, in consultation with the previous president, in trying to address some of the global concerns, when the case was made that if the United States does not help those countries in their desperation, meaning famine, disease, all kinds of challenges that those countries were facing, that other countries would step in to provide the support, and those other countries would have great influence and, in fact, lead those countries towards communism. And so that is so while USAID is to provide charitable assistance and does a great deal of that, like feeding babies that otherwise would starve, getting essential medicines to people, improving health, giving them access to the basic childhood vaccines that we get over here, all those kinds of things. While they do a lot of charitable work, there's also reasons that were considered in our national security interests that we should do this, so that we have some soft influence with those countries, so that those countries turn to us as a resource for help rather than our enemies, so that we can be aware of things that are going on in those countries, such as what terrorist groups are doing, what their activities are, what their influence are. So we get a lot of benefits out of it. Now, have there been some activities that USAID has engaged in, some of the publications, some of the educational programs that might be offensive to some in the United States? I think that's quite possibly the case. What's the remedy? I don't think it's go in and drive everybody out of the organization and shut it down. I think the remedy is you have leadership that understands that's not what the priorities are. That's not what the focus is. That's not what you work on. What you work on is these other things. And you change the organization rather than destroy it. And I fear that, again, this is an overreach. We're just going over because of a minor issue that has riled some people up, that now we're just going to destroy the whole thing. And that makes no sense to me. And people will die because of that decision.
So, with that said, Dr. Pate, negative impacts on the average American if U.S. aid does shutter, because, as you said, people will die. And I think that there's this idea that, well, it's people in third world countries, right? A human is a human. But
right,
they're stopping things like, critical care of like the Marburg virus right now. I read that there is an Ebola outbreak happening. People are not getting the vaccines. They're not getting the health care they need. The last time I checked, we are a global society that travels. So I would think that there would eventually be an impact even outside of our national security. How about our health?
You're exactly right. So, two things. Number one, when we have people on the ground in these other countries, we become aware of disease outbreaks much sooner than we would otherwise. And we gain insights about what some of these new disease outbreaks are there, how they're occurring, that kind of thing. Now, with ending this and ending our participation with World Health Organization, what is going to happen is that we'll find out much later when things get into the regular media, those kind of things, instead of having direct channels of information. That means we're not going to be able to prepare as quickly. And then to your point, that is exactly correct. And for example, let's take monkeypox. People thought for many decades monkeypox is something that happens in Africa. It's of no concern to us. Then in 2022, there was a global outbreak, and the United States had the second highest levels of disease outside of Africa. Now, because we put that fire out, but then didn't take steps to really completely get it eradicated or under control, we are now dealing with a new strain of that virus that's worse, and it is now spreading. But guess what? We have very little information about where it's spreading to because we're cutting off. We're not letting the CDC report data. We're not talking to the World Health Organization. We are just shooting ourselves in the foot. And we have had an Ebola case turn up in the United States, more than one. These other disease outbreaks, you're exactly right. All it takes is somebody to get on a plane, and then we can have it in our country.
You recently wrote a guest commentary in the Idaho Press stating that RFK Jr. and Medicaid cuts won't be good for our health. So I want to dive into this, and let's start with Robert Kennedy Jr., who is one step closer to becoming the U.S. Secretary of Health. Tell us about what you wrote and why.
Well, I was hoping to potentially contribute to the decision making of Senator Crapo. Apparently, it was unsuccessful. But the point being that I can agree with the idea of the Trump administration that we need some people who are not entrenched in the status quo. There's no questions that there are lots of things that are wrong with our American healthcare system. There is lots of opportunity to improve it. it is way too costly. It is way too inefficient. It is way too inconsistent in the delivery of its services. There is just a lot of things to be done. However, I can tell you, as somebody who has been in that career most of my life and studied it, it is extremely complex, and there are so many interconnected parts that if you try to fix one part and don't know how that impacts all the others, you're going to create problems. So, yes, I think having somebody who is not an entrenched bureaucrat that's been doing this is a great idea. But I think the idea that, well, let's just bring in somebody who knows nothing about healthcare and let them go at it, that is a recipe for disaster. And, one of the points I made is that if somebody in your family had a really serious illness and you just weren't sure what doctor to go to or what to do for them or that kind of thing, I doubt that you would call your plumber up and say, look, I've got this terrible problem with my kid or my wife, or your next door neighbor who does construction and say, hey, you want to take a look at my wife? Something's wrong with her. I mean, no, you would go to somebody that actually knows about health issues. And so, in Senator Crapo's statement, he is right. We need to do something about chronic illness in the United States. That is a huge part of our excess costs and decreased productivity in the United States. However, the same thing applies even if I'm taking an Uber ride to the airport and my Uber driver says, I think our American healthcare system would be better if we did X or Y. And I thought, oh yeah, that is a good idea. I still wouldn't suggest that my Uber driver be made secretary of HHS just because they had a good idea. And the point is that we need people that can run large, complicated organizations, don't destroy them, preserve what's good, and improve what's not good. And that doesn't seem to be the approach we're taking. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember when I thought we'd never have an anti-vaxxer on a public health board. Well, that no longer is a shock. And I still thought we would never have somebody who was so anti-science, so anti vaccines and medicine that they would run the country's largest healthcare system and the nation's most important medical research institution. And so it just shows you where we're at. And it won't be without consequence if it goes forward.
And Dr. Pate, another thing that we're seeing is really attempts to gut Medicaid, to pull Medicaid back. You also wrote about this, and you basically said if our government cuts Medicaid, it will hurt Idahoans. Explain.
Yes,
and because it's not because federal level and state level.
That's right, and so certainly lots of things that can be improved about Medicaid as well. And Medicaid has been a long-standing grievance in my Republican Party for reasons I understand. However, there is a misconception that people that are on Medicaid just need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Well, I've taken care of many of those people that are on Medicaid. And let me tell you, for example, one of my patients who had a condition where every bone in her body fuses. So she's immobile. She's in an electric wheelchair. She cannot pick up her glass to move it to her face to drink. So she has a place in her wheelchair where she can put the cup in an extra long straw so that she could drink. She can't talk normally because even the bones in her voice box are fused together. She doesn't need to pull herself up by her bootstraps. I'm amazed that she has done what she's done. So that's where Medicaid can come in to help. But specifically to Idaho, if you look at the hospitals in Idaho, most of them are rural, most of them are small, and most of them are teetering on the brink of insolvency. All you have to do is do something to Medicaid, like we would fear would happen with the direction it's going, and reduce those payments for those rural hospitals, and we will see a domino effect of those rural hospitals closing. And so that's not good for Idahoans, because guess what? If you work on a farm and you're pregnant, you might still need the hospital to deliver that baby, especially if it's a complicated birth. And now that hospital closes, you may have to drive or be flown to the nearest hospital on something that could take hours when you're having an obstetrical emergency. When you have a stroke or a heart attack, every minute counts. You're going to have to travel further to get medical care. So it's not good. It's not going to help us. Yes, it would seem to score some political points, but at the end of the day, it hurts the very people that are most likely to be supporting this.
Dr. Payne, I want to talk about a bill that was introduced in the state house this week. An Idaho senator introduced a bill that would put a 10-year moratorium on human gene therapy. Now, in this, the senator, Brandon Shippey, stated that the bill is named after Doug Cameron. He says this was an Idaho rancher who suffered injuries from the COVID-19 vaccine. And I want to quote this. He says, quote, with Senate Bill 1036, we are taking a responsible approach to pause the use of experimental gene therapy shots while we further assess their long-term safety and effectiveness. The people of Idaho deserve full transparency and accountability when it comes to medical products being promoted for widespread use, unquote. Dr. Pate, of course, we do deserve complete and full transparency and accountability when it comes to things like this. I would like to know your thoughts on a bill like this, and I've got about 2.5 minutes left with you.
Okay, because I only need 2 hours. So okay. Let me just first say, transparency to me does not mean that you just promote misinformation. His press release is just filled with incorrect information and misinterpretation of information. So yes, let's be transparent, but let's be transparent with good information. Number two, are they going to do the same thing? So, for example, there are blood pressure medicines that have caused harm to people. Should we have the Idaho legislature put a 10-year pause on those medicines? What about a medicine for your diabetes? Some of those have caused harm. Are we going to put a pause on those? Again, it's the common theme of overreaction. The other thing that we've talked about is that, first of all, it is a complete misnomer to say that the COVID vaccines are gene therapy. And even that is not transparent, because really that allegation has been made of the mRNA vaccines, and Novavax is not one and couldn't possibly be construed as gene therapy. But the mRNA vaccines are not gene therapy, and we can talk about why that's the case on another show. But the other thing is, we are at increased danger for facing a pandemic, especially because of all the changes we just talked about, getting out of the World Health Organization, cutting off USAID, all that stuff. So with the next pandemic, the answer, first of all, could be much more serious than COVID. And the answer to saving millions of lives may be an mRNA vaccine. This law would say that the rest of the world can do that, but you couldn't do it in Idaho. This is absolutely an overreach, overreaction, and it's based on misinformation.
Well, with that said, Dr. Pate, we so appreciate you and coming in and explaining all of this to us. A lot to digest this last week. With that said, folks, I know you are getting your questions into us. We will get to those next week. We just had so much that was critically important to cover and to understand this week as to what's been happening at the federal and state level. So we wanted to make sure we got you that information this week, but we will get to those questions. So again, if you have them, send us an email at boisestate@idahomatters@boisestate.edu. Big thank you to Dr. David Pate, former CEO of St. Luke's Health System and the co-author of the book, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudet.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.